I'm going to lay a little philosophy and ethics on you. Are you ready? It doesn't really matter if you're ready. But I'm going to start with a story. You guys might not know this, but I've had a long-standing interest in American Indian environmental thought. And for years, I've taught classes on American Indian environmental thought, and I've taught history and philosophy of ecology classes as well. And one of the things that I've noticed when I teach those classes is that when we get to the topic of traditional ecological knowledge, there's a noticeable shift in the enthusiasm of my students. And I started taking pictures of that. So the first thing, I want to understand that, and I want to think about LTER in light of that response that my students have. But first, let's just mention what is TEK, what is traditional ecological knowledge. A lot of times when we talk about traditional ecological knowledge, we make it into an epistemological issue. Epistemology is the study of the nature of knowledge. How do we know things? How do we go about knowing things? So we talk about it in epistemological terms. We say there's a different way that traditional peoples have of knowing. So this is just a kind of standard part of a definition of TEK. It's a cumulative body of knowledge and beliefs handed down through generations. So there's something about the method of epistemology, by cultural transmission, and it's about the relationships of living beings, including humans, with one another and with their environment. So we can see the ecological part at the end. But I've also taught classes in comparative epistemology. And I've noticed that students do not demonstrate the same level of enthusiasm for comparative epistemology, even when I say comparative epistemology. So those classes are more like this at the end of the day. So I want to understand the difference between those two things. I think actually what's going on in these classes is the students are getting excited about ethics. It's not about epistemology, it's about ethics. I think they see TEK not only as epistemologically interesting, sure, but they zero in on the ethical underpinnings. And so you can see that sometimes come out in definitions of TEK as well. And look at the kind of ethical tones that are here. It's more than just information about the living world. It's a way of thinking, a way of being in which is based on learning from the land itself, from acknowledging the land as a teacher. It's the knowledge of the web of relationships among living beings that is grounded in mind, body, emotion, and spirit. It couples knowledge with our responsibilities for the natural world. And so I started thinking about this in terms of the relationship. I see parallels between traditional ecological knowledge and scientific ecological knowledge, especially as it turns out or shows up in long-term ecological research. We pay attention for a long time. We are based in a place. But we don't seem to have a corresponding ethic or an ethical analog. Traditional ecological knowledge here has an analog. It has an ethical analog. It's about inclusivity. It's the recognition that the world that we're paying attention to matters. It counts in and of itself, apart from or beyond how it affects us. But I don't think we yet have developed an ethical analog in LTER, and I'm wondering about what that might actually look like. So ethics is, I was trying to think of some analogies here. I think ethics is like water. It's necessary. You have to have it. You can't escape it. We try really hard sometimes to escape it, but you can't. You have to drink from one stream of ethics or the other. But you also need to see that the stream that you choose to drink from really matters. It really matters at the end of the day. And that the fact is there are many streams. There's not just one to drink from. So to decide which stream to drink from, which ethics guide us, the first question that we have to answer is really simple, and that is just, what's our purpose? What is our purpose? What's the purpose of our work as ecologists? Yes, but more specifically, what's the purpose of our work at the place we call the Andrews Forest, our work as long-term ecological researchers? Why do we do this? Now, we often say things that I'm starting to think are they're nice, but they're a little bit of a cop-out. We say things, well, like, our purpose is to understand, to increase our knowledge. But I would push us a little bit on that. I'd go one step further, and I'd say, well, why? Why do you want to understand? Why do you want to increase your knowledge? And I think there are at least two choices here, two choices about our purpose that could underpin our efforts. One is, well, it's for us. It's about us. It's about human well-being at the end of the day. Or the answer could be, no, it's about the land, which obviously includes us, but it's about the land first and foremost. So if we do the work that we do only for us, then our purpose is to understand the ways that we can maximize, perhaps wisely, perhaps, the land's benefit to human beings, or ways that we can minimize impacts on the land so that it can continue to drip milk and honey into our mouths. Francis Bacon in 1605 believed that that was, in fact, the purpose of science. Bacon said this. No, he said this. The purpose of science is for the glory of the Creator and for the relief of man's estate. So the important things in the world, the things that science could contribute to, were God and humans, and everything else just served that end. Interestingly, that view never really went away and hasn't gone away, I don't think. That view finds its way into forestry in the thinking of Gifford Pinchot, actually, who said very boldly in his autobiography that there are just two things on this material earth. There are people and there are natural resources. There are people and there's stuff for people. We know that that view of the world has many, many champions, and at the same time, we also believe that it's that basic anthropocentric utilitarian view that's actually created many of our environmental problems in the first place. Now, we could quibble with that. We could say, no, it hasn't, and that's fine, we can quibble with it. But let's for a moment just assume that that's actually true, that there's something right about that critique, that we're not going to simply tweak around the corners and technologize and economize our way out of our current mess. So one of the things we could do, speaking of purpose, is we could try to line up our work with a kind of enlightened view of that anthropocentric utilitarian worldview. We could try, and I think in fact we should in certain ways do that. When we speak, especially when we can speak of grave harms to humans and human communities and cultures, which I believe are things that are wonderful and worth saving, and especially when our unique attentiveness affords us unique insights into those genuine benefits for humans and human communities. But I would advise us to be very careful here. We should be aware that the wooden horse of anthropocentrism can also harbor interests that are far less than genuinely concerned about human beings. And I don't see our role as catering to or apologizing for those interests. But I worry a little bit about that too, that alignment. I worry about how far even a more noble version of an anthropocentric purpose will take us in our work. And I worry most about handing out a stone when what the world needs so desperately is bread, sugar pops instead of vegetables and protein, if you will. So again, just to review this table, expand it a little bit. We're place-based, they're place-based. We're long-term, they're long-term. They have a clear purpose. It's about living appropriately, and that includes members of the land community at large. Our purpose, I don't think we've decided on. Our purpose is unclear. And as a result of that, we have a big question mark in the ethics box. And so I'm wondering about that. And so now I go from philosopher to fisherman. I want to dangle some worms in front of you and see if you're at all interested. So I think of three different ways that we could fill in that last box that would be beyond the kind of purely anthropocentric and that would give us this analog traditional ecological knowledge. I'm going to mention two of them very quickly, and the third one, probably the weirdest one, I'm going to try to more fully articulate. And I think each one of these have actually been touched on in subtle ways and sometimes overt ways throughout all of the talks today, which makes me feel a little bit more comfortable with what I'm going to say. At least when I'm burned at the stake, I'll have company. So the first one is just science that generates wonder, science that makes us go, wow. Wow, that's actually how water moves in a stream or through the land. That's not what I thought. That's not what I assumed. Wow, old-growth forests might have characteristics that buffer responses to climate change, and that might create refugia for plants and animal species. Who'd have thunk it? These are the surprises. These are the novel, the wondrous ways to look at our systems and therefore to look at the world. We're good at finding these. We can find these. And that could be a purpose, actually. That could be the purpose of our work or a purpose of our work. Wonder, wow, is a fascinating response, I think, to a finding, to a scientific finding. because it's both an emotive response, but I also think it's an ethical response. It's normatively charged, and the normative charge is positive. We seldom say, wow, that's amazing, that's incredible, and then follow up that statement with, let's ruin that. So I would advise us not to underestimate the power of wonder or of being conveyors of stories that make people go, wow. The second thing, and I think really closely related, and that was touched on today as well, our purpose could be to do science that generates humility, that overtly demonstrates and generates humility. We thought it was going to be this way, but it turned out to be some other way. Our understanding of something changes when we view it over the long term, and we have a unique ability to be able to do that. A story that we were so sure of, a track that we were so sure of, actually turns out to be different. And we have a lot of those stories, and we could get better at pointing out that the take-home lesson, the management implication, if you will, of these stories is the need for increased humility. Lest you think that sounds weird, there are ecologists who actually talk about this, recent and in the distant past. Our colleague Dan Doak, actually commenting on the phenomenon of ecological surprises, has said recently the extent and the frequency of major surprises in ecological systems argue for substantial humility about our predictive abilities. And mathematical ecologist Darcy Thompson once wrote, it's the principle involved and not the ultimate and very complex results that we can alone attempt to grapple with. So why is this important? Well, some people argue that it's the lack of humility that actually lies at the root of our environmental problems in the first place, a belief that we can or do understand and can predict and control our systems. I think that science that pushes back against that kind of hubris might be absolutely critically important at this moment in time. And finally, the weird one, as if those weren't weird, I'll make those sound sane, is science that personifies. That this is spooky, I know, to scientists, but I want to try to convince you that this is actually really, really important. So science that personifies is science that begins with the assumption that land is not merely an object to study, but it's a subject that participates with us in the telling of its story, or it allows us to tell its story. This implies that we begin with the assumption to view land as a subject that is in fact worthy of study or worthy of understanding. Consider an analogy that's already actually been made today in a way, on a riff off of it. The purpose of traditional ecological knowledge is akin to the purpose of the courtship that a couple goes through on their way to becoming marriage partners. The purpose of a healthy courtship is to better understand one's partner so that each knows how best to care for the other. It is not to understand how best to sustainably extract the most from each other. We don't think of that as a healthy marriage. We might know those marriages, but we don't think of them as good ones. So our colleagues Ray Pierotti and Dan Wildcat say this about the purpose of ecological science from an American Indian perspective, especially when native scientists are asked, what good is the work that you do? They say this: the question contains the hidden assumption that if what we do does not directly benefit human beings in some way, it is without value. We often answer that our work teaches us more about the other members of our community and how to live with them. But most people of Western heritage appear confused by that answer and do not understand this point. In contrast, if we give this answer to Native American elders, they are completely satisfied, for they understand implicitly what we are trying to accomplish. And of course, all of this is a choice. When we have a choice about what the purpose of our work will be, and if we don't make the choice will be foisted upon us. Just like it is with other humans, to think about other humans as subjects or objects, people or things. So the argument I want to make is this: we don't properly respect the land, and we don't properly honor it, and that's created and continues to perpetuate our current environmental problems. But the challenge is, arguably, respect and honor are things that only occur when you personify something. They only occur between persons, when you see something as a person. So you can only develop truly ethical relationships with another person. So of course, we tell land stories. We tell land stories all the time. And I think through telling the story of something or someone, you can personify them. When you recognize that something has a story or someone has a story, they are others that you can empathize with. We already do this in a way. We tell land stories. But often, always maybe, we make those stories of land our stories. We make them about us. This is how the land might serve us. Ecosystem services is a particularly current example. Or land is a place where human dramas play out. Gettysburg, Hiroshima, Malheur. We tell stories about land, but we could tell stories of land. And so this is a challenge for us. Our colleague, moss ecologist, writer, Native American scholar Robin Kimmerer puts it this way: our relationship with land cannot heal until we hear its stories, but who will tell them? So this is what LTER could be. We could be the ones who tell the story of our place. We could be the ones who push against these trends to reduce our work to yet another human story. We could be the ones that personify our places, showing that our place, and therefore all places or any place, could be personified. So we could choose to do that. And that choice might have actual impact in the world. And I would add this, that thinking about the range of speakers that we've had today and the dimensions of our program, science that generates wonder, science that generates humility, science that personifies, all of those things they create amazing opportunities, maybe even absolute necessities for collaborations with colleagues in the social sciences, the arts, and the humanities. We would need those partners to help in those efforts. Those efforts would give us a nucleus around which to work that would go beyond just simply working next to each other, which is kind of the model that we have now. So I'll confess, the last thing I'll say is that I fully confess that I want my students to look at my work in the world, to look at our work in the world in the same way that they do traditional ecological knowledge. I want them to be inspired by it and excited and lifted up by that work, to see their ethical aspirations in that work. So the purpose and the ethical engine that drives our work forward is something we choose, or that's chosen for us. And we should choose this. We should make overt choices about our purpose. And we should get comfortable with that choice, and we should get comfortable articulating and defending that choice. And most of all, we shouldn't apologize for that choice. So I am going to forego the pleasure of awkwardly answering your questions. And for the last, or poorly, for the last year we've been working with the filmmaker Jeremy Monroe. Some of you know Jeremy's work. On trying to create a kind of promotional video or an informational video or an aspirational video or something on the Andrews LTER program. And this is it.
Without this place, we wouldn't know how important Pacific Northwest rainforests are in capturing and storing water. Or how well these forests capture carbon and produce oxygen. Or what a 500-year-old tree is as wildlife habitat. We wouldn't know how much life is created when these big old trees finally fall. And what the forest floor does for the quality of our air and water. Or what those trees do to shape rivers and provide habitat for the life within them. The questions that are asked here are parts of that big question. How does our world work? This is the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. This is a place of long-term inquiry. It's a community of people who are working to understand the ecosystems that run our planet and our own role in those ecosystems.